Communication is always critical when dating, but particularly crucial during the pandemic. The problem some run into is understanding different communication styles. Joining us this morning to help us break all this down is Alex Merritt, the love engineer. Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you're actually a mechanical engineer by trade, and you're applying what you've learned as an engineer to the heart. What actually made you take a look at this?
You know, I had questions. That's really what it came down to. I had questions. I was wondering how and why things work, particularly relationships. And because I have a mechanical engineering background, and that's just the way I think. And so I'm like, this has to apply and work in relationships too.
And so the way you think, it's more methodical, it's got a more technical approach. One of the things that you talk about is communicate to connect, not to win. What does that mean?
It's that when you're using words, when you are speaking, deciding beforehand what is the outcome and the outcome of connection as opposed to not, right? The words we use are building bridges to something. And so ensuring that they build bridges that allow you to connect to the person you're speaking to.
And sometimes when you just look at men and women and how men and women communicate, there are some differences there. Take the phrase, for example, I don't care. When a man says that, it may mean one thing. When a woman says it, it may be something completely different.
You know, that's a fascinating part about the communication between the genders. We understand it in other languages where someone can be using a similar word and meaning something different. And similar is what's happening between the genders. Like when a man usually says, I don't care, the men typically are very literal. And so they literally mean, I don't care, make a decision, let's move on. Oftentimes when women use the same word, and this comes up always with food. So if anybody's ever had the discussion around, what do you want to eat? And, you know, both parties say, I don't care. And then 40 minutes later, they're still not figuring it out. But when women say, I don't care, it's usually an indication that she's not thought about the question or has not committed to a place in her mind. And she's wanting there to be a discussion and some options thrown out, and together there's going to be a decision made on where one will dine. And
when it comes down to gender and communication, sometimes you say women are more story oriented. They want to tell you the story about the issue, and men want you to just tell them what's going on, what do you need, how do we get the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, and this came very clearly in engineering school, right? So I was one of a few females there. But one of the things that I learned really quickly is why we talk, right? For men, oftentimes, men talk to solve a problem. The reason they are even talking is because there is a solution that is needed. For women, ironically, the act of talking is how she solves the problem. And so often wanting to share more details is also how come usually women can get on the phone and spend hours, if you will, having a really great conversation, because in there is building a relationship, they're sharing a story, there's all of these things that's understood about what it means to talk when it's women, but men are usually bottom lining things.
And so now that we know and see that differences do exist in how we communicate, how do you apply what you're talking about to dating or even to marriage?
In the same way, one of them is just the awareness. One of the analogies that I use, I call it the Avali relationship theory, is just understanding that, for lack of a better, men are like a PC, women are like a Mac. And if you can understand that there's two different operating systems here, then it gives you freedom to not try to force the other to be like the other, right? Because there's nothing you can do to turn a PC into a Mac and vice versa. And it's understanding that we may be operating differently. However, we are looking for similar outcomes, which is to be loved, to be connected, and to be in great relationships. And it's just appreciating that.
And then quickly, you have created a card game to help people ask some of those questions that get a little bit beyond the surface questions that they may typically find themselves stuck in. And then you've also got your dessert and discussion initiative, those events you've been hosting now for years. What do you hope people take away from the games and from the space you've been able to create for conversation?
Absolutely. As it relates to the live events, obviously with the pandemic, it definitely shifted the whole world. So those are been on pause, but that's where the War on Love games come into play. They're provocative communication, conversation starters that allow you to have fun, powerful, if you will, conversations and fun, just fun conversations about topics that you actually do want to talk about. You just don't know it, but for the game, that they are important and that they come up. And when men and women play it, married, single, doesn't matter when they play it, it's all the feedback I get is always that it's a lot of fun. And when it gets naughty, I just tell people they can just blame it on the game. I ask the question, not them. And so it takes a lot of the pressure off those communicating. They just get to share their truth. And there's no right or wrong answer. It just sparks the dialogue.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex Merritt, for joining us. I know a lot of folks are probably having some conversations over the course of the last year. Their relationship may look a little different. Maybe they're spending more time in places where they didn't normally need to, and they're having to evaluate those relationships in a different way. So understanding the genders, how we communicate, and how to communicate more effectively, always helpful. Thanks so much, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.